I can still hear the clink of crystal glasses when my mother leaned across the restaurant table, smiling sweetly for the photos, before whispering the words that cracked something feral open inside me: "We wish you were never born." The room spun. My throat burned. My entire family pretended nothing happened, as if my humiliation were tradition. I sat there, diploma still warm in my hands, wondering how people who raised me could celebrate my achievements while erasing my existence. But in that moment, between my mother's smile and my father's silence, I decided something quietly, dangerously final. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far the truth will travel. The car ride home was silent except for the faint, plastic click of my phone recording app stopping. The laughter still echoed through the parking lot as I slipped it into my pocket, my mother's voice, sharp and theatrical, mimicking my tears as if I were a punchline. My cousins howled. My father's low chuckle punctuated it like punctuation to a crime. The night air smelled like champagne and exhaust. I stared out the window, pretending to scroll, pretending not to exist, every syllable searing into me. It wasn't a moment, it was evidence. For years I had felt the sting of something I couldn't name, a strange void beneath their smiles. Now it had a voice. Their voices. The silence in the car was thick, like the quiet after a slap. My father drove like he always did, one hand on the wheel, the other adjusting the radio to news he never listened to. "Stop being dramatic," he finally said when I exhaled too hard. My mother didn't turn around. She just checked her reflection in her phone, ensuring her lipstick survived the night better than I did. I wanted to scream, to ask if she understood the gravity of what she'd done, but the words stayed caged. I'd learned long ago that in this family, my pain was entertainment, my silence was survival. The streetlights cut through the windshield like interrogation lamps, one after another, bleaching my face into fragments. I stared at my reflection in the glass, blurred, fractured, and remembered every time she had told me to smile wider, to not make things awkward. I remembered when I was 7, when she laughed as I cried over a broken trophy, telling the guests I was too sensitive. I remembered birthdays where my name was misspelled on cakes because she was too busy to notice. I remembered the quiet favoritism toward my brother, the golden child who could do no wrong, who existed as the unspoken standard I'd always failed to reach. Every memory now reeked of intention. Every joke wasn't humor, it was a habit of cruelty. The realization hit like cold water. This was not love twisted by frustration. This was control disguised as care. When we reached the house, the porch light burned too bright, washing the door in sterile white. I walked ahead of them, keys already in hand, my heart a metronome of rage and restraint. Upstairs, my room felt smaller than ever, walls closing in with the scent of old paint and buried tears. I sat on the edge of my bed, pressed play on the recording, and listened. Over and over. My mother's laugh was the soundtrack to my humiliation, my father's silence, the baseline of my grief. My aunt's voice joined in, her laugh, too. The entire bloodline had conspired to erase my dignity, and I had the proof sitting right there in the glow of my phone. I pressed the screen until my thumb hurt, pausing it at the words that cut deepest. "She actually thought we were proud." I didn't cry this time. I just breathed, long and slow, like someone pulling a thread from a wound. My chest didn't ache the same way, it burned. The humiliation had stopped bleeding and started crystallizing into something else, something colder, something sharper. Revenge wasn't the word yet, it was still forming, still learning my name. But I could feel its heartbeat inside me, matching my own. I stared at my phone, the recording still paused, and whispered to myself, "Never again." My voice sounded foreign, almost dangerous. Then I opened the hidden folder where I'd kept screenshots, photos, bank statements, the things I'd collected over the years without knowing why. Every slight, every manipulation, every secret conversation I wasn't meant to see. I thought of how my mother used guilt as currency and my father used silence as punishment. The psychology of their abuse had been precise. It had trained me to obey. To doubt myself. To shrink. But tonight, I realized obedience had also made me observant. I'd learned their patterns, their tones, their lies. And I could use them. The phone buzzed with a message from my brother. "Don't make this bigger than it is." I almost laughed. That sentence summed up my entire childhood, every wound minimized, every truth dismissed. I typed back, "Don't worry. I won't." Then deleted it. No warning. No emotion. Silence was now my weapon. The night deepened. The house settled into its nocturnal creaks, every sound familiar, the hum of the fridge, the bathroom tap dripping in 3-second intervals, the faint echo of my mother's television in her room. I lay down, the phone still in my hand, replaying that recording one last time, imprinting every word into my brain. My father's tone, dismissive. My mother's venom, casual. My aunt's laughter, contagious. I wanted to remember it perfectly because soon, their laughter would be evidence, and my silence would be strategy. I scrolled through my photo gallery, finding a picture from the dinner, the family lined up in a fake embrace. My mother's hand rested on my shoulder, her nails painted crimson, her smile so photogenic it could win awards. But now, all I saw was a mask. Behind it, there was envy. Fear. The kind of fear narcissists have when the person they've broken starts to look whole again. I turned off the lights and stared at the ceiling. The dark felt different now. Not suffocating, strategic. My brain started connecting threads. The sudden money problems my parents mentioned last year. The inheritance my grandmother had spoken about before she died, something set aside for my education. The abrupt way that topic had vanished afterward. I'd dismissed it, trusting them. Now I wondered if I'd been groomed to trust them precisely so they could steal without resistance. I reached for my laptop, opened it, and felt that familiar chill as the screen lit up the room. I knew every password they'd ever used, my father's predictable combinations, my mother's habit of using birth dates. It wasn't intrusion anymore, it was reclamation. I logged into my old email account, the one tied to my grandmother's legal correspondence. I hadn't checked it in years. It loaded slowly, as if the past itself resisted opening. Scrolling through the inbox, my heart pounded. Most messages were spam, but then I saw a chain labeled, Trust Fund Distribution, Final Confirmation. The sender's name jolted me, my grandmother's attorney. My fingers trembled as I hovered over it, then clicked. The email expanded, lines of legal phrasing filling the screen, but one sentence stood out like blood on snow, beneficiary, my full name. Amount transferred, redacted. My pulse skipped. My parents had told me the fund never existed, that my grandmother had changed her mind. I scrolled further. There were attachments, PDF files, dated years ago. One of them was titled Reassignment Authorization. Another name was listed beside mine, my father's. I could feel my throat tightening as realization dawned. They hadn't just lied. They had erased me financially, systematically, with signatures and paperwork. Generational theft disguised as parenting. My mind fractured into two currents, the daughter, trembling and betrayed, and the strategist, silent and calculating. The daughter wanted to confront them, scream, throw the laptop down the stairs. The strategist pressed download all. Every file. Every attachment. Evidence, not emotion. My revenge plan began in that instant, born not from hatred but precision. I would not destroy them with fire. I would bury them with truth. Outside my window, a car door slammed. For a second, I froze, thinking someone had heard me. But it was just the neighbors. I leaned back, heart still racing, laptop still glowing in the dark. I whispered, almost to myself, you should have left me nothing. Because now, with proof in my hands and humiliation hardened into purpose, I understood the one thing they never expected, I would never seek their apology. I would take back what they stole, and I would make them watch. I clicked open another folder, and there it was, a forwarded thread from years ago, subject line half-cut but legible enough to sting, she doesn't need to know. My breath caught as I opened it. The loading wheel spun endlessly, mocking me with its patience. And then the screen flashed. An attachment I'd never seen before appeared beneath the message, its name simple, devastating, final. The email loaded slowly, the way truth sometimes resists being seen. My grandmother's name appeared in bold, formal letters at the top of a legal thread, her tone calm, deliberate, filled with the kind of affection my parents had always rewritten as distance. I scrolled down, my hands trembling so hard that the cursor jumped across the screen. There it was, proof that she had left me something. A trust, an inheritance, a quiet attempt to secure me against the chaos she must have sensed in her own children. She hadn't trusted them. She had trusted me. And they had taken it anyway. The words on the screen blurred for a moment as my vision swam. My mother's whispers, my father's calm silence, every cutting remark suddenly fit together in one grotesque mosaic of intent. They hadn't hated me for existing, they'd hated me for being the obstacle to their greed. I clicked through the attachments, one by one. Legal documents with forged signatures, bank transfers rerouted to joint accounts. My father's initials were everywhere, my mother's handwriting forged in places she thought I'd never look. It was so meticulous it almost impressed me. They had done this years ago, before I'd even graduated, before I'd known anything about how inheritance worked. They had planned my exclusion in advance, planting emotional mines in every corner of my life so that by the time I reached this discovery, I'd doubt my own worth enough not to fight back. Narcissistic genius, really, break the child, then steal her silence. But they had underestimated how grief can turn into fire when given evidence. I sat back in my chair, letting the blue glow of the laptop wash over my face. For the first time in years, I felt clarity, not the brittle clarity of rage, but the smooth, clinical kind that lawyers must feel when they know they're about to win. Every act of emotional abuse, every humiliation, every "you're too sensitive" had been scaffolding for something larger. Their cruelty had been strategic. My success had been inconvenient. The more I thrived, the harder it was for them to justify why I deserved nothing. That was why my mother's smile always trembled around the edges when I achieved something. She wasn't proud, she was threatened. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. My father's shoes sat by the door, perfectly aligned, just as he'd always demanded ours to be. Control disguised as order. I thought about the night he told me that respect was earned, not owed, even as I was the one paying their phone bills while in college. I thought about my mother's tears when she claimed they couldn't afford to help with my tuition, how she cried dramatically for sympathy from relatives who never learned the truth, that my tuition had already been prepaid by my grandmother's trust. That they had drained it dry. I opened another folder, labeled Final Authorization. Inside were scanned letters from the bank, confirming transfers. I recognized the bank logo immediately, it was the same branch where my father kept his private account. The dates lined up perfectly, 1 week after my grandmother's funeral. I remember that week vividly, the smell of lilies, the polite condolences, my mother's dramatic eulogy about family unity. I'd been grieving while they'd been stealing. I felt something inside me snap quietly, a kind of emotional vertebra realigning. I had spent years begging for love from thieves. I moved to the next page, reading every line with the detachment of a detective rather than a daughter. Each document painted a new layer of betrayal. Joint accounts created under my grandmother's name before her death, withdrawals disguised as estate maintenance, forged authorizations. They hadn't even needed to hack or threaten anyone, they'd weaponized trust. The oldest trick in the book. I couldn't tell if I wanted to vomit or applaud. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother this time. Hope you're not still sulking. Dad says we'll discuss your attitude tomorrow. I stared at it until the words blurred into static. My attitude. That was the phrase she always used when I refused to apologize for being hurt. It was her way of folding every argument into my fault. For a brief moment, I wondered what it would feel like to confront them now, show them the evidence, watch their faces unravel. But that would be too easy for them. They'd twist it, gaslight me, turn it into another scene about how ungrateful I was. No, the confrontation would have to come later, under my control, when every piece was in place. I opened my grandmother's last email again and noticed something strange. At the bottom, beneath her signature, there was a short postscript: "If anything happens, contact Evelyn." I frowned. Evelyn. The name sounded familiar, like a whisper from childhood. Then I remembered, a distant cousin, the one my mother called unstable and unreliable. She had disappeared from family gatherings years ago, and every time I'd asked about her, my mother would change the subject. My pulse quickened. I searched the name in my contacts and found an old number, long disconnected. I tried social media next, finding an account half dormant but still visible. Her profile picture was a beach sunset, her last post over a year old. But her message inbox was open. I hesitated for a long time, then typed, "Evelyn, it's me. I think Grandma left me something, and I think they took it." I didn't expect an answer that night, but within minutes, the typing dots appeared. "I knew this day would come," she wrote. "Check the drawer in Grandma's piano. They missed something." My breath caught. Grandma's piano. The upright one still sitting in my parents' living room like a decorative ghost. I hadn't touched it since I was 12. My mother always said it was too sentimental to sell, but she never let me play it either. Now I understood why. It was the only piece of her mother she couldn't fully control. The clock read 2:13 a.m. when I crept down the stairs, barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. The house felt like an organism asleep, its air thick with secrets. Moonlight slid through the blinds, striping the piano in pale silver. I knelt beside it, fingers tracing the edges of the drawer she mentioned. It stuck slightly, the wood warped with age. I tugged gently until it gave, releasing a faint scent of old varnish and paper. Inside were yellowed envelopes, music sheets, and beneath them, a small black folder. My pulse thundered. I opened it and found more documents, legal correspondence between my grandmother and her attorney, confirming the existence of not one, but two trusts. The first was the one I'd already uncovered. The second was different. Larger. Its beneficiary section was partially redacted, but I could make out one crucial line: to be transferred upon the event of educational completion. My graduation. My eyes widened. That's why they'd been so uneasy about that night. It wasn't the celebration that bothered them, it was the timing. My graduation triggered the release of the second trust, and they had no way to stop it without drawing attention. That's why my mother lost control at the dinner, why the venom slipped through her perfect smile. My success had activated something they couldn't afford. I sat there, trembling, realizing that this wasn't just theft, it was panic disguised as cruelty. They hadn't just taken from me, they were terrified I might find out. The hatred had always been fear in disguise. A sick comfort washed over me. Fear meant they could still be cornered. Fear meant they weren't untouchable. I ran my fingers across the old papers, committing every date and signature to memory. I returned the folder exactly as I'd found it, sliding the drawer shut, leaving no trace. Upstairs, I opened my laptop again and took photographs of every document, saving them in a hidden folder labeled innocuously as tax notes. My mind was spinning with connections, two trusts, overlapping dates, fraudulent authorizations. My parents had committed not just emotional abuse but legal crime. And the more I looked, the more I saw threads connecting to something bigger: financial transfers to shell accounts, unfamiliar names listed as consultants, and one recurring company title that kept appearing in the footer of several documents: Elmore Holdings. I Googled it. A simple page appeared, a small financial consultancy registered under my father's name. Its address matched a property I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold as I clicked the About tab and saw a list of directors: my father, my uncle, and my mother. They had created a company to launder my inheritance, to wash it clean and make it vanish behind paperwork. Every holiday dinner, every staged photo, every fake apology had been funded by my grandmother's stolen love. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred with the text. The betrayal no longer hurt the same way, it fascinated me. This was the anatomy of deceit, and I was dissecting it in real time. The puzzle was nearly complete. But as I began to close the tabs, I noticed another email, one that didn't belong to the same thread. It was recent, dated only a month ago, sent from my father's account to the same attorney, marked confidential. The subject line froze me where I sat: reallocation plan, secondary asset. My hands went still over the keyboard. Secondary asset? The phrase hummed in my head like a threat. If they'd stolen from me once, what else had they buried? What could possibly be more valuable than the inheritance itself? I opened the email. My screen dimmed for a second, and then the file began to load, line by line, until the contents appeared. What I saw made my stomach twist. It wasn't just about me. It was about someone else. Someone who didn't even know they existed in the plan. And it was far more dangerous than money. The truth had a texture now, coarse, suffocating, and too real to ignore. It wasn't just about stolen inheritance or fraudulent signatures. That was the surface. The rot went deeper. It threaded through fake companies, falsified addresses, and the slow, careful construction of a financial trap with my name at its center. I sat in front of my laptop, the glow carving shadows under my eyes, scrolling through spreadsheets that didn't belong to me but bore my name like a brand. Tax records. Loan applications. Debts I never owed. My parents hadn't just robbed me, they had repurposed me. They had turned my identity into collateral, a financial ghost who could bleed without ever being seen. I downloaded statements from 3 different banks, all leading to one disturbing pattern: accounts opened under variations of my name. A middle initial added here, a surname tweaked there. At first glance, they looked legitimate. But the transactions were impossible to ignore: withdrawals I never made, signatures I never signed, credit pulled for loans I never received. And the balances? Negative. Deeply. My parents weren't just greedy, they were drowning. And they had decided I would be the life raft. I couldn't breathe. My hands were cold and tingling, heart pounding like I was being chased. I was. Not by someone with a knife, but by paper cuts deep enough to destroy my future. My credit score. My name. My legal identity, had they forged that, too? I wanted to believe this was a mistake, a fluke, some hacker. But I'd seen my father's name on the corporate documents. My mother's signature on bank authorizations. This was a plan. A carefully orchestrated betrayal dressed in the robes of parenthood. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed verification. I needed someone who wouldn't gaslight me, someone not tethered to their toxic empire. Evelyn hadn't replied since that night, so I took a different risk. I called my Aunt Linda. She hadn't spoken to my parents in over a decade, cut off after a fight that no one in the family ever explained. She answered on the second ring. "I didn't expect to hear from you," she said, voice low and weary. "I need to ask you something." "Something important," I whispered. "About Grandma. About the money." The line was quiet for a moment. Then she exhaled slowly. "I always wondered if you'd call one day. I didn't think you'd still be alive if you did." That sentence pierced deeper than I expected. She invited me over immediately. No hesitation. Her home smelled like lemon balm and disillusionment. She poured me tea with shaking hands, then sat across from me with eyes that had seen too much. "They started forging things even before she passed," she said. "Your mother convinced the bank that your grandmother wanted everything transferred to the family, meaning them. She isolated her, made it seem like you didn't care. They told her you were selfish, that you didn't want anything to do with her estate." I nearly dropped my cup. "That's not true. She was everything to me." "I know." She knew too, near the end. "That's why she left backup documents with Evelyn. But your parents, they're clever. Legally speaking, they stay just shy of criminal. They used you like insulation." I sat back, nauseated. "They used my identity." Her expression didn't change. "They always intended to. When you were a baby, your mother opened a savings account in your name. That account was drained before you turned 10. When you went to college, they pulled out a loan in your name. You thought your scholarships covered everything? She laughed bitterly. They didn't. You were used. Your identity has been leveraged for years. It all came crashing down. The guilt I felt for not being grateful enough. The fear of checking my credit because I didn't want to know. The little things, bills that never made sense, letters I thought were junk mail, rejections for credit cards despite a clean record. The truth had been layered into my life like arsenic, just enough to weaken me over time. Back in my room that night, I compiled everything. Screenshots, emails, files from Aunt Linda's box of secrets. Bank statements cross-referenced with corporate filings. Photos of forged signatures. Every piece of the puzzle slid into place until it became a weapon. A weapon with my name engraved on the hilt. I created a private drive folder, encrypted, untraceable, labeling it Exhibit A. If anything happened to me, I wanted it released. I even wrote a statement, voice shaking but steady, recording myself saying everything out loud. Naming names. Detailing dates. Walking through the evidence like a prosecutor. It was the first time I heard my voice without apology. My revenge plan wasn't rage. It was math. It was logic. They used legality against me, and I would do the same. I researched identity theft, financial fraud, forged documentation, and asset laundering. I read case law until my eyes blurred. I understood now that I didn't need to scream to be heard, I needed to be undeniable. But even the most strategic war has moments of human fragility. That night, I made a mistake. I left my laptop open while I went downstairs to refill my water. Just a moment. One stupid moment. When I came back up, my mother was standing in my doorway. Her hand rested on the edge of my desk, the laptop screen glowing brightly. I froze, the glass still in my hand. She turned to me slowly, the faintest curl in her lips, not surprise, not anger. Satisfaction. I always wondered when you'd start snooping, she said softly. Her tone wasn't reprimanding. It was victorious. Like she'd already calculated this outcome. Funny, how predictable you are. Just like your father said. My mouth went dry. What are you doing in my room? Her eyes sparkled, sharp and familiar. I could ask you the same. Digging through things that don't belong to you. Reading things you can't possibly understand. You're playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. I'm not a child anymore, I said, my voice more solid than I felt. No, she agreed. You're something worse. You're inconvenient. That makes you dangerous. And dangerous daughters tend to disappear, eventually. The threat was soft, nearly poetic. A line rehearsed. A trap laid long ago. She stepped toward me, hand grazing the back of the chair, then paused. You think you're the first person to find those files? She asked. We've been cleaning up our tracks for years. There's nothing you'll find that we didn't plan for. Nothing you can do that won't backfire. Her smile was blade thin. But go ahead. Keep digging. It'll make the show more entertaining when you realize you're not holding cards. You're the table. With that, she turned and walked out, heels tapping calmly down the hallway like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just told me I was already lost. I stood frozen for a long time, my mind blank with static. I didn't even rush to the laptop. She hadn't closed anything, hadn't deleted a file. That was the point. She didn't need to. Her message was psychological. Not I know. But I've been waiting. I sat back down slowly, staring at the screen, heart pounding as one thought echoed louder than all the others. She thinks she's already won. Fear is an emotion they trained into me, drip by drip, dressed as discipline, masked as love. But fear has a half-life. Eventually it decays into something sharper. That morning, as I watched the cursor blink over the search bar, how to report identity theft by a parent, I realized I was no longer afraid of them. I was afraid of who I would become if I didn't fight back. The legal language was cold and meticulous. Fraud. Forgery. Financial abuse. I read case studies like autopsy reports, dissecting every step, every loophole. Parents arrested for stealing their children's inheritances. Mothers sentenced for laundering through their kids' social security numbers. The more I read, the more monstrous my own story became, not because of what they'd done, but how familiar it was in the world of silent family crimes. What they did wasn't rare. It was just quiet. I created burner accounts. Anonymous usernames. I posted in legal forums, burying the specifics just enough to protect myself. The replies came fast. One attorney said, "You need to speak to a lawyer before they ruin your credit forever." Another asked if I had documentation. I had more than that. I had a map. A paper trail so complete, so damning, it could unravel them to the marrow. I just didn't know where to begin. Eventually, someone from the forum reached out via private message. A pro bono lawyer who specialized in financial abuse and identity fraud, especially in cases involving family. I double-checked her credentials. She was real. She'd represented a woman who had sued her father for liquidating her trust fund. That woman had won. My hands trembled as I typed a reply. We scheduled a call. I told no one. Not Evelyn. Not Aunt Linda. I needed this first conversation to be mine, unfiltered by other voices, untainted by old wounds. The call was scheduled for 8 p.m. I paced the room until then, rereading documents, organizing my files, practicing how to say the ugliest truths out loud without flinching. When the screen finally lit up, the attorney's voice was calm. Kind. Efficient. She asked questions like scalpels, precise, cutting through emotion to get to the muscle of the matter. Tell me exactly what you found. I laid it all out. The forged trust fund documents. The accounts in my name. The paper trail of rerouted assets. The shell company. My mother's threats. My father's silence. She listened for a long time without interrupting. Then she said, "If what you're saying is true, your parents could go to prison." I sat still, staring at the screen as the words echoed. It wasn't the drama of it that hit me, it was the legality. The reality. For the first time, someone with power had confirmed what I already knew in my bones. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic. It was criminal. "Have you filed a police report?" she asked. No. Not yet. Good. We'll do that strategically. Timing will matter. Those words lit something inside me. Timing. Strategy. I was no longer the daughter on the receiving end of gaslight and guilt. I was a ticking clock, and they had no idea when I would go off. She gave me a list, documents to compile, accounts to freeze, agencies to contact. I nodded through the call, writing everything down, every instruction, every name. We agreed to speak again in a week. When I ended the call, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in the dark, staring at my hands, as if seeing them for the first time. They'd made me feel powerless for so long that I'd forgotten what it meant to act on my own behalf. The next few days were surgical. I made copies of every file, one for the attorney, one for a private encrypted drive, one for a backup external hidden in an old DVD case beneath my bed. I went to the bank under the guise of updating my information and quietly requested my credit report. The teller didn't flinch, but I saw something flicker in her eyes when she pulled up my account and found lines of debt I'd never approved. I spoke to someone in the fraud department. Calmly. Without accusation. I let them know I had legal representation and documentation, and that I was preparing a case. That word, case, changed everything. Doors began to open. The deeper I dug, the more patterns emerged. My parents hadn't just stolen from me, they'd built a system around it. Credit cards, lines of credit, small business loans. All under a framework that painted me as complicit. I had to unravel it all before they realized how close I was. I started recording every interaction. My phone became a vault, capturing conversations, tracking inconsistencies, preserving moments that would later serve as evidence. I documented my mother's passive-aggressive remarks, my father's sudden nervousness whenever I asked simple questions. It was all shifting. They could feel the energy change, even if they didn't know why. One night at dinner, my mother casually mentioned a routine audit the family business was undergoing. I pretended not to notice the way her fork hesitated over her plate when she said it. My father didn't speak at all. That was how I knew the pressure had started to reach them. I kept my mask on. Smiled at the right times. Laughed at the wrong jokes. I was invisible again, but this time by choice. They thought I was retreating. In reality, I was staging a coup. My transformation wasn't dramatic. It was internal. Slow. Like tectonic plates shifting beneath the surface. I started sleeping with my phone on record under my pillow. I changed my passwords. I added two-factor authentication. I installed a motion sensor on my bedroom door, disguised as a nightlight. They had treated me like a child too long. Now they wouldn't even recognize the woman I was becoming. I began studying court proceedings. Watching depositions. Reading how victims became plaintiffs. I learned how evidence had to be presented. How judges responded to emotional narratives versus strategic ones. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about precision. I wasn't just going to hurt them. I was going to expose them so thoroughly they'd have to lie under oath to survive. But exposure meant risk. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move and they'd retreat deeper, hide the remaining evidence, vanish the money into unreachable accounts. I had to make them feel safe, like they were still in control. The way I used to feel when I sat between them at church, thinking I belonged. So I played the part. The good daughter. The soft-spoken one. The peacemaker. I even apologized for being distant. My mother smiled that day. Not warmly, but with satisfaction. Like she believed she'd won me back. That smile would be her undoing. And I would make sure she remembered it, frozen in time, forever. I became a mirror. A blank surface. Reflective, not revealing. Every morning, I greeted them with a smile so polished it made my cheeks ache, carefully crafted to appear fragile, like I was still recovering, still dependent on their approval. I said thank you too often, laughed a little too easily, played the harmless daughter they had trained me to be. It was a performance, and they bought it because it flattered their illusion of control. But inside, everything had changed. There was no trust left, only theater. No affection, only strategy. I didn't feel anymore, I observed. Emotional distance was the only way I could survive being in the same house as them. I watched every word I spoke, measuring their reactions with forensic precision. I dropped casual, false hints into conversations, about job interviews, imaginary friends, a fake relationship, just to see what made them twitch. What they repeated. What they twisted. My mother, always desperate to seem in the know, bit at every piece of bait. My father remained quiet, but I noticed the way he paused when I mentioned anything financial. Subtle cues. His hands still, eyes too focused. He wasn't indifferent. He was calculating. I began setting traps. It started small. I left a printed email chain, doctored, entirely fictional, sitting partially hidden in my desk drawer. It implied I was preparing to contact the IRS about irregularities in family financial records. Within 2 days, my father had accidentally entered my room while I was out, claiming he thought he left his keys there. I found the email missing. He didn't mention it. Neither did I. But in his silence, he told me everything. Another time, I told my mother that a distant cousin had reached out about Grandma's estate. I watched the blood drain from her face, watched her fingers tighten around her coffee mug. "Oh," she said. "Strange, I thought she moved to Florida." She hadn't. I knew exactly where she lived. But I nodded, feigning ignorance, and let my mother scramble to reorient. Her fear was starting to show, but only in flashes. Cracks in porcelain. I kept recording everything: voice memos, security footage from a hidden camera I installed in my room, email logs, time-stamped files. I copied every document I could access and filed them under innocuous folders named recipes, budget drafts, and car insurance quotes. My devices were locked down tighter than vaults. I even carried a USB drive and a fake tampon applicator in my purse, because I knew neither of them would ever touch it. They had stolen from me for years. Now I was going to strip them bare, not with rage, but with receipts. At dinner, I played nice. I asked about their day. I complimented my mother's new haircut, even though she'd cut it to mimic a woman half her age. I listened as my father lectured about loyalty and family duty, his tone smug, as if he was daring me to challenge him. I never took the bait. Let him believe I was docile. Let him think I was stupid. That was the most dangerous mistake he could make. On Sundays, I joined my mother for coffee on the porch. She'd stir her sugar obsessively and complain about people she pretended to like. I'd nod, adding just enough opinion to sound engaged but never enough to reveal anything real. Every conversation became data. I tracked her moods, her tells, her triggers. I began to map their weak spots like a military strategist, where their control slipped, where their narrative fractured, where their pride overpowered their caution. My mother's was vanity. She needed to be seen as perfect, always the doting mother, always the victim if challenged. I knew exactly how to weaponize that. My father's was secrecy. He operated in shadows, and nothing terrified him more than exposure. I just had to turn on the lights at the right moment. I forged friendly email exchanges with an estate lawyer, knowing my parents still had access to my old email. I used phrases like pending litigation and unexplained discrepancies. Within hours of sending the draft to myself, my mother suddenly asked me about my plans for the future. She said it with syrup in her voice, the kind she used before she sank a knife between my ribs. "You know we've always supported you, right?" she said, smiling too hard. I smiled back. "Of course, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." That night, I found my bedroom window slightly cracked open. I hadn't left it that way. Someone was checking, making sure nothing had been added to the room that didn't belong. I had always known they monitored me, but now they were actively surveilling. Good. Let them. Paranoia was useful when you knew how to guide it. I started humming when I walked through the house. Not songs, but phrases. I'd sing parts of fake phone conversations under my breath. "Well, the lawyer said they'd testify if necessary, or if the transfer to the secondary account needs more documentation." None of it meant anything. It was noise, carefully designed to sound like a leak. I waited to see what would return to me, twisted, distorted, weaponized. I wasn't disappointed. My aunt called me one afternoon, her voice low and cautious. "Your father said you're thinking of suing them," she said, unsure. "He told the family you've been brainwashed." I didn't argue. "What do you believe?" "I believe you were always too smart for them," she said. I began charting the family, who was loyal, who was complicit, who was afraid. My cousins were mostly oblivious, too wrapped in their own lives. My uncles knew something was off but had learned not to ask questions. Only one, my mother's brother, refused to speak to them altogether. I sent him an anonymous envelope of documents. No return address. No note. Just truth. The longer I played the game, the clearer it became: they weren't strong. They were fragile people who survived by controlling others, manipulating truth, and banking on silence. But silence was no longer their ally. It was mine. And then it happened. It was late. I had just returned from scanning documents at the public library, the only safe place I trusted for digital transfers. I came home to find my father sitting in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the refrigerator door he hadn't closed all the way. He didn't look up. just sipped his drink and said, "You've been busy lately." My stomach clenched. "School stuff," I replied casually. He nodded slowly, then set the glass down with a deliberate clink. "Funny," he said, voice flat, "I was wondering what you were doing emailing Jacob Greeley." The name hit me like a slap. Jacob Greeley. The pro bono attorney. The one I had never mentioned out loud. Never emailed from any trackable account. Never connected to anything they should have been able to find. I stared at him. My mind racing, trying to hide the panic pulsing in my throat. He finally looked up at me, eyes dull, knowing. "Should I be worried?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Should you?" He smiled back. Not kind. Not cruel. Just confident. And in that instant, I knew. Either someone close to me had betrayed me. Or they had planted the question themselves. Either way, the war had officially begun. They say imitation is the highest form of flattery, but what I was doing now wasn't flattery, it was infiltration. I didn't just survive their manipulation. I learned it, studied its rhythm like a language, and now I spoke it better than they did. The only difference was that I didn't need to lie to survive. I only needed to let them think I was still broken. That was the trick. If they believed I was confused, soft, emotionally unraveling, they'd keep trying to play me. And that's when they were weakest, when they thought they had already won. So I began testing the water, one poison drop at a time. I told my cousin Melanie that I was thinking of dropping out of grad school, that I was overwhelmed. 2 days later, my mother suddenly suggested I take a mental health break and come stay with her for a while. I told my aunt I'd applied for a job in another state, fictional, of course, and within 48 hours, my father asked if I was planning to move away to escape responsibility. Their spiderweb was reactive, fast, and always hungry for information. I just needed to keep feeding it things they weren't expecting. The more they tried to manipulate me, the more they exposed themselves. I kept detailed notes in a file called Weather Patterns. Not documents, just behavior. Who repeated what? How long it took for information to boomerang back to me, reshaped and weaponized. Which relatives asked probing questions, and which ones pretended to be supportive but pushed too hard. There were spies in the bloodline, of that, I was sure. Some did it for gossip, others for allegiance, and a few, I suspect, did it just to stay in my parents' favor. Because in this family, loyalty wasn't earned. It was purchased, usually with fear. What shocked me most wasn't how quickly the lies spread, but how easily they accepted them. As if they'd been waiting for new stories to justify the discomfort I made them feel. I wasn't the rebellious daughter. I was the inconvenient mirror. I reminded them of everything they chose to excuse, of the manipulation, the gaslighting, the generational rot they wrapped in lace and called tradition. So I leaned in. I called my uncle and let my voice shake as I talked about being so confused about my finances. I pretended I had accidentally found the trust paperwork. I told him I was too scared to ask my parents, and watched his discomfort rise like steam through the phone. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding," he said, too quickly. I made a note. Neutral. Possibly complicit. 2 days later, my mother asked if I'd been talking to the wrong people. That confirmed it. I hadn't made a mistake reaching out, I had flushed out another loyalist. But not everyone was loyal. Some were just tired. My cousin Jordan called me unexpectedly. "I don't know what's going on," he said, "but the way they talk about you, it's not normal." He sounded cautious, scared even. I didn't blame him. This family devoured anyone who strayed too far from the center. Still, I listened carefully. He didn't know specifics. But he'd heard the whispers. My mother claiming I was emotionally unstable. My father saying I had boundary issues. My brother chiming in with, "She always had a victim complex." It was almost laughable. They had built a narrative around my sanity while actively orchestrating my financial demise. So I leaned deeper into the game. I created a fake email address and sent an anonymous tip to a known family friend who owed me nothing. I included a redacted screenshot of the financial documents, no names, just enough context to raise suspicion. Within a week, my mother invited me to brunch. She called it a reset. I agreed, and wore white. She hated when I wore white. Said it made me look washed out, like I was trying too hard. But on that day, I wanted to look like a ghost. Like a daughter reborn from ashes. She greeted me with a hug that was too long and a smile that was all teeth. We talked about meaningless things. The weather. The neighbors. Her detox cleanse. She called me darling too many times. It was like watching someone perform motherhood on stage for an audience that wasn't there. Then she leaned in, voice light and false. I know things have been tense, she said, but let's not let outsiders poison our family. Outsiders. That was it. She didn't know where the leak came from, but she was panicking. Good. I smiled. Of course, Mom. Family's everything. She relaxed. Believed me again. Because to a narcissist, a convincing lie feels more real than a hard truth. And I had become an exceptional liar. Later that night, I went back over my notes, connecting dots, rereading messages. That's when I noticed it, something strange in a shared iCloud album I hadn't touched in years. Buried in an old family vacation folder, there was a file titled dinnerlist.txt. I clicked it out of curiosity. It wasn't a dinner list. It was a shared group chat backup, automatically synced by someone's phone, likely my brother's. And what I found wasn't just damning. It was surgical. Dozens of messages. Months worth. Conversations between my parents, brother, aunts, and even a cousin or two. The name of the group? Family Core. As if the rest of us were just orbiting debris. The chat was filled with coded phrases, gossip, strategic planning about me. They had a system. Green light for passive manipulation. Yellow for escalation. Red for isolation. I scrolled in disbelief as I read about how they decided when to pull back emotionally, when to gaslight gently, and when to push the financial narrative. My own life, dissected like a project plan. They referred to me by a nickname, Echo. Because I only existed in response to them. That name told me everything. I wasn't just being manipulated. I was being studied. Tracked. Managed. This was a long game for them, a legacy of control. And I had just stumbled into their war room. My hands were ice cold, trembling as I screen recorded every page, every thread. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. They thought they were gods in that thread. Above consequence. Speaking in the language of puppeteers. But I had the puppet strings now. And I was ready to pull. They wrote about me like I wasn't human. Like I was a blemish on their pristine image, an obstacle to be removed quietly, surgically. Each message stripped away whatever illusions I had left, exposing a truth I never dared admit. I was never a daughter to them. I was a threat. A variable they couldn't control, a mirror they wanted to shatter before it reflected too much. I read through years of conversations, each thread like a scalpel peeling back my skin. They called me unstable. Overly emotional. A time bomb. My mother, in one message, said, "We need to manage her before she turns into a liability." My father replied, "She already is. The window is closing." They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what I knew. The lies they spread were methodical. My brother told distant relatives that I'd been hospitalized for depression, which never happened. My aunt claimed I fabricated stories for attention. The group chat was their ecosystem, a place where they reinforced each other's fiction until it calcified into truth. Every time I had doubted myself growing up, every time I felt like maybe I was the problem, it had been by design. They'd gaslit me not just individually, but collectively. A family-wide campaign of distortion. But amidst the venom, something else emerged, evidence. Screenshots of emails forwarded between them. Conversations about money moved into hidden accounts. Mentions of falsified documents they needed to update. There was one line, from my uncle, that read, "She doesn't know we used her SSN, right?" My brother answered, "Even if she finds out, she can't prove it was us. She signs things without reading." I felt something in my chest collapse. A dull implosion of everything I once believed was reparable. They didn't just manipulate me, they capitalized on my trust, on my desire to belong. And worst of all, they were still planning. It wasn't just history in that thread. There were present tense conversations. Messages exchanged in the last week. My name came up repeatedly. Not with concern, but with urgency. My mother wrote, "She's too quiet lately." That's not like her. My father asked, "Think she knows about the Florida account?" Then a message from someone I didn't expect, my cousin Leah. "We need to move now. Before she files anything. If we time it right, she won't see it coming." I leaned back in my chair, nausea crawling up my throat. I had underestimated how far they were willing to go. I thought exposure would be enough. I thought knowledge would be the final weapon. But they were preparing a countermove. A final betrayal. My phone buzzed, jarring me from the screen. A text. From Jordan. "You need to be careful. I just heard them talking. They're planning something for you." My hands went cold. I typed back, "What are they planning?" His reply came fast. "I don't know. But there's a deadline." My blood ran still. In the reflection of the laptop screen, I didn't see myself anymore. I saw the daughter they should have feared all along. I started waking up before the sun. Not from anxiety, but strategy. It was easier to move before the house came alive with fake smiles and quiet threats. The kitchen lights buzzed softly overhead as I mapped timelines in the quiet, drawing lines between conversations, receipts, and reactions. I wasn't just preparing a case, I was constructing an ambush. Every move had to be silent. Every piece, precise. Revenge, I had come to learn, wasn't just about the final blow. It was about engineering a moment so undeniable, so airtight, that even the guilty couldn't breathe through it. I began with the timeline. I cross-referenced every stolen dollar, every forged document, every manipulation they wrapped in warmth. I created a spreadsheet labeled "The Architecture of Betrayal," color-coded by offense, identity theft, financial fraud, emotional coercion, reputation damage. Each item had a date, a source, a screenshot. I didn't just want to expose them, I wanted to leave no room for their lies to breathe. I contacted my attorney again. This time, I wasn't trembling. "I'm ready," I told her. "Then let's begin," she said. We started with the financial institutions. Formal inquiries. Freeze requests. Identity verification audits. My attorney helped me draft letters, calm, professional, and laced with just enough legal pressure to prompt internal investigations. The kind of letters that made compliance officers sweat. I contacted the bank where one of the shell accounts was housed, using documentation I'd found hidden in my father's desk drawer, proof of wire transfers tied to accounts in my name. The woman on the phone stammered when I calmly explained the situation. "We'll escalate this," she said. Immediately. Next came government agencies. I filed an affidavit with the FTC for identity theft. I submitted a case number to the IRS. I flagged the fraudulent loans. I compiled statements, documented every step. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the whistleblower. And in that role, there was no room for fear. But the most delicate piece of the plan was the witnesses. There were people who knew the truth. Some had seen it, others had suspected it, but all had stayed silent because the family made silence feel safer than truth. I reached out to them one by one. Old friends of my grandmother. Former neighbors. Distant cousins who had fallen out of the inner circle. I didn't beg them. I gave them facts. I offered protection. I promised anonymity. And slowly, one by one, they came forward. She told me she left it all to you, one neighbor said. She said she didn't trust your parents with a cent. Another cousin admitted, your mom asked me to lie if anyone ever asked about the will. I didn't realize what it meant then. Each testimony became a tile in the mosaic. Evidence became structure. Emotion became motion. I kept everything encrypted, backed up, and triple verified. I rehearsed the confrontation, not a shouting match, but a surgical unmasking. My attorney guided me through potential outcomes. We prepared a cease and desist letter. A press release, in case they tried to spin the narrative publicly. I even drafted an email to be automatically sent if something happened to me. Paranoia wasn't just justified. It was necessary. Everything was in place. Everything except them. And then, she changed. My mother. She began to shift overnight. As if a switch had flipped. She started making breakfast, soft-boiled eggs, toast cut into triangles, just like when I was little. She knocked on my door before entering, complimented my outfits, asked about my day. Her voice softened. Her gaze lingered longer, like she was searching for a version of me she had buried long ago. It was so well performed I almost believed her. Almost. She baked banana bread the way she used to when I was sick in elementary school. She bought me a new coat, said it was just because. And then, one night, she sat beside me on the couch and placed a trembling hand over mine. You know I've always loved you, right? My body stiffened. She felt it. She always did. But she continued anyway. I know I wasn't perfect, she whispered. But I did my best. We all make mistakes. I want to fix things before it's too late. I turned to look at her. Her eyes glistened, but there was no softness behind them. Only calculation. She was trying to rewrite the ending. But the pages had already been printed. I said nothing. Just smiled. And in my silence, she knew. Something was coming. She smelled like lavender and control. It was subtle, her new perfume, maybe, or just another trick designed to relax my guard. She'd started wearing soft cardigans again, the ones she used to wrap around me when I was sick as a child. Her voice had dropped into that low, soothing register, as if we were back in the days when she read bedtime stories instead of financial spreadsheets soaked in deceit. But I saw through it. I didn't just see the performance, I recorded it. My phone sat hidden inside the cushion next to me, screen down, microphone open. Every saccharine word she spoke was evidence now, not affection. Her attempts at redemption weren't driven by guilt. They were triggered by fear. And fear made her reckless. She didn't know how to be subtle when the stakes rose. She didn't realize that every lie dressed in love was another confession dressed in silk. She sat beside me on the edge of the couch, folding her hands like she was praying. I've been thinking a lot lately, she began, voice breaking in the places she thought it should. About how we got here. About you and me. I kept my face open, just vulnerable enough to bait more. I nodded slowly, like I wanted this, needed this. She continued. You were always so bright. I think that scared your father. It made him feel like he was losing control. There it was. The first accidental truth. Not framed as guilt, but projection. I tilted my head slightly, giving her space to run further. He never meant to hurt you, she said, as if that made it better. It was just, sometimes we didn't know how to parent someone like you. You asked too many questions. You didn't trust easily. You taught me not to, I wanted to say. But I bit my tongue. Silence was strategy now. She paused, searching my face. I let a tear pool at the corner of my eye, manufactured, controlled, a prop. Her fingers reached for mine. We may have made mistakes, she said. But you're still our daughter. And family forgives. Forgives. A demand dressed as mercy. I asked gently, "What kind of mistakes?" She flinched, but recovered quickly. "Nothing intentional. Just things that happened during the estate transition. Miscommunications. Paperwork that got misplaced. You know how those things go. Misplaced." She had forged documents, rerouted funds, opened accounts in my name, and now it was all a misunderstanding filed under the word misplaced. I gave her the smallest smile. "I just want to understand." She exhaled like a weight had been lifted. "Good," she said. "Because we've been working on a way to make things right. Your father and I. We just need your help." There it was. The turn. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. The kind she used to send birthday cards in, only this time it didn't hold affection. It held the noose. "This is just a quick amendment," she said, handing it to me. "Nothing major. It's about the house. We realized your name was on an old version of the deed and that could complicate things if anything ever happened to us." The weight of the envelope burned in my lap. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could feel the trap humming through the seams. "I thought I wasn't on the deed," I said softly. She hesitated. "You were. For a while. Grandma wanted it that way. But that was before you, before things got complicated. Before I stopped being useful." I slid the paper out slowly, letting the silence stretch. The document was short, 3 pages. The title was buried in legalese, but the key phrase was bolded, "Release of claim and financial interest." They were trying to erase me, legally, permanently. My mother watched me read, her expression carefully blank, but her pulse betrayed her. Her foot tapped slightly. Her nails pressed into her palm. Her lips twitched every time my eyes moved across the page. She wasn't asking for a signature. She was betting I wouldn't dare refuse it. "Does this protect me too?" I asked. She smiled, too wide. "Of course, sweetheart. It's just a formality." I pressed the pages flat against my leg, staring at her. Then, slowly, I reached for the pen. Her eyes lit up. And I whispered, "Where exactly do I sign?" The sun was unnaturally bright that day, the kind of heatless, sterile light that makes everything feel artificial. I arrived precisely on time, just late enough to seem reluctant, just early enough to maintain the illusion that I still cared. The gathering was being hosted in the backyard of my parents' suburban kingdom, the same space where they'd celebrated birthdays, baptisms, and betrayals. Balloons floated half-heartedly near the patio railing, and the scent of overcooked meat mingled with perfume and pretense. This was no celebration. This was a stage. And they thought I was walking into a trap. But I hadn't come as a daughter. I came as a reckoning. My mother greeted me with a hug that lingered just long enough to whisper, "Let's try not to cause a scene today." I smiled, kissed her cheek, and whispered back, "I won't need to." They'd chosen the occasion under the guise of another graduation celebration, this time for one of my cousins. But really, it was a family PR operation, one last attempt to solidify the narrative, to paint me as the unstable one if I dared disrupt the carefully orchestrated piece. Chairs were arranged in a wide circle, just enough distance to feign inclusion while keeping everyone on edge. My father stood near the grill like he always did, not cooking but performing masculinity. My brother watched me like a hawk, fake laughter echoing too loud. I noted who approached me. Who avoided my gaze. Who leaned in when I spoke, not out of affection, but to monitor the script. I waited. I let them settle into their control. I let the wine flow, the conversations bloom, the petty comments slip through teeth clenched in plastic smiles. I laughed when I was supposed to. I complimented a dress I found hideous. I offered to help with the salad. Let them believe I had folded back into the mold. Let them breathe easy just a little longer. Then I stood up. "I have a small gift," I announced, voice light, almost cheerful. "Since we're all here." My mother's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. My father froze, spatula paused midair. The room shifted, barely, but I felt it like a tremor before the quake. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the center table. Vanilla cardstock. Polished. Neutral. I opened it slowly, revealing clear sheet protectors with printed pages inside, legal documents, emails, bank statements, and the piece de resistance, the trust amendment in my grandmother's original handwriting. I just thought it might be nice to share a few family heirlooms, I said, flipping the first page toward the group. My uncle leaned in. His face drained of color. My aunt gasped. My mother stepped forward, hand outstretched as if to cover the pages. What is this? She asked, voice tight. I looked at her like I didn't understand the question. Documentation. You know, family history. My father was already moving. He stepped forward, slammed the folder shut with one hand, and hissed, "Not here." I didn't flinch. Why not? Everything in there belongs to me. Enough, he growled under his breath. Come with me. Now. I followed him inside, calm, my hands loose at my sides. I'd expected this. I'd predicted his tell, anger disguised as control, aggression wrapped in authority. He moved fast, shoulder tense, eyes darting toward the hallway like he was searching for exits. He led me into his office, shut the door, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. He turned slowly, fists clenched. Where did you get those? You mean the papers you thought were destroyed? The bank documents? The forged signatures? I tilted my head. Hard drive backups are amazing, aren't they? His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're doing. I smiled. No. I think I know exactly what I'm doing. He stared at me, something shifting behind his eyes, not fear, not yet, but calculation. If you go through with this, you'll what? I interrupted. Ruin me? Sue me? Tell the rest of the family I'm unstable? You already tried that. The chat logs say it all. I've read every word. He flinched. So I pressed further. You treated me like a problem to solve, not a person. You funneled money through my name. You broke the law. And then you made brunch plans like none of it mattered. His silence was confirmation. I pulled out a flash drive and placed it on his desk. This is a copy. I've already sent one to my lawyer, another to an external party. If anything happens to me, anything at all, it all goes public. His face blanched, but still, he said nothing. Just stared. I want you to think very carefully about what happens next, I whispered. Because the daughter you raised, the one who kept quiet, who played along. She doesn't live here anymore. He stepped forward then, fists unclenching, eyes sharp with something new. Not anger. Not panic. Desperation. I need to make a call, he muttered, brushing past me. And then he was gone, slamming the door behind him, pulling out his phone. Who was he calling? Who else was involved? And how much time did I have before they made their next move? The air in the living room was different when I walked back in. Something had fractured. My father's absence created a vacuum of power, and the tension settled over the room like fog. My mother stood frozen near the dining table, her smile rigid, her eyes flickering toward the folder I'd left behind. The others had gathered around it, my aunts, uncles, cousins, flipping through the transparent sleeves with mounting disbelief. No one was laughing now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood near the archway, letting silence work in my favor. It made them uncomfortable, forced them to fill it with questions they were too afraid to ask directly. What is all this? My cousin Leah asked, flipping through the pages. Is this real? Yes, I said, meeting her eyes. Every page. Every number. Every lie. My mother took a step forward, her voice syrupy and brittle. Sweetheart, these documents, they're taken out of context. I turned to her slowly. The context is that you used my identity to commit fraud. The context is that you erased me from my own inheritance. The context is that you've spent years manipulating every person in this room to protect the illusion of a perfect family. Gasps rippled through the crowd like aftershocks. Aunt Maria dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the rug like confessions finally escaping. You don't know what you're talking about, my uncle snapped. This is just some emotional overreaction. I locked eyes with him. Then explained the forged signatures. The shell accounts. The loan in my name I never applied for. Explain why I have proof that my grandmother's trust was tampered with days after she died. No one moved. Explain the group chat, I added, my voice calm, cutting. The one where I'm referred to as Echo. The one where you all discussed how to manage me like a liability. Several people turned to each other in confusion. What group chat? Jordan asked, his brow furrowing. So they hadn't all known. Interesting. I reached into my bag, pulled out a tablet, and tapped play on a screen-recorded scroll through the messages. Faces turned pale. One of my aunts stepped back like the words might burn her. I let the silence return, let them sit in the gravity of what I was showing them. Lies don't evaporate when exposed, they calcify in people's throats, choking them with the realization they'd swallowed poison willingly. I didn't know about any of this, Leah said quietly, trembling. I swear. I believe you, I said. But silence isn't innocence anymore. The room fractured then, some distancing themselves, others going on defense. Accusations began to bloom in the corners. My mother tried to regain control, calling out names, saying I was being dramatic, that I was mentally fragile. But the words didn't land like they used to. The performance had worn thin. Someone asked, what about the Florida property? Someone else muttered, wait, I thought she wasn't in the will at all. My mother spun, her voice rising, this is slander. No, I said, stepping forward, holding up a notarized document. This is evidence. Her face crumpled, not with shame, but with rage. Unfiltered, snarling rage. The kind she could no longer mask with charm. She opened her mouth to speak. And then we all heard it. The distant crunch of tires on gravel. A low rumble. Then the unmistakable crackle of a police radio. Everyone turned. Outside, through the wide living room window, a patrol car rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in the driveway. A uniformed officer stepped out. And for a moment, no one breathed. Not me. Not them. Not even the wind. We all stood suspended in that single, terrible question. Were they here for my parents? Or had someone decided to make me the scapegoat again? The knock at the door was polite, almost delicate, like the officers already knew what kind of house this was. I watched my mother flinch as the sound echoed through the living room. My aunt stood frozen mid-step, lips parted as if trying to form a protest but unsure of who the protest should be against. My father returned from the hallway, face pale, phone clutched in his hand like a rosary. He saw the uniforms through the window and stopped cold. The officer's voice was calm. Ma'am, sir, we're responding to a report of financial misconduct and identity fraud linked to individuals at this address. May we come in? My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father tried to recover first, stepping forward with that performative charm he used at PTA meetings and HOA luncheons. This is clearly a mistake, he said, chuckling softly. We're a close family. Misunderstandings happen. Then I'm sure you won't mind answering a few questions, the second officer said, stepping in behind the first. The energy shifted. The temperature in the room dropped. No one sat down. No one moved. I remained in the corner, near the window, watching it unfold with surgical detachment. My pulse was calm. My hands were steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, but reality was even better. It was quiet, clean, legal. The officers began their interviews one by one. They were prepared, names, dates, documents. My documents. I had provided them in advance, through my attorney, compiled and cross-referenced and indexed so tightly there wasn't room for ambiguity. Everything was time-stamped. Every discrepancy highlighted. Forged signatures. Falsified loan applications. Misdirected trust distributions. All backed up, twice. They separated us into rooms. I was asked first. Can you confirm the dates these accounts were opened? Yes, I said, handing over a second copy of the timeline. And I can tell you whose handwriting appears on the authorizations. Have you been in contact with the financial institutions directly? Yes. And I have the call logs and confirmation emails. They asked about the shell companies. About Elmore Holdings. About the unauthorized property transfers. I answered calmly, clearly, with no embellishments. I wasn't here to accuse. I was here to deliver. I watched the officers' faces shift from skepticism to quiet alarm. They'd expected drama. They were receiving precision. After my interview, I was escorted to the hallway while they moved on to the others. My cousin Leah sobbed through her answers. She hadn't known, not fully, and now the ground beneath her feet was gone. My brother stammered and asked for a lawyer. He tried to act offended. Indignant. But when they mentioned the email with his name on it, the one where he joked about my credit score being a sacrifice for the greater good, his face fell. Then it was my father's turn. He held out longer than I expected. Calm. Stoic. Strategic. He denied. But every denial had a time-stamped contradiction. Every "I don't recall" was met with a document bearing his signature. His answers grew shorter. His eyes duller. My mother cracked faster. They showed her the group chat logs. The financial records. The audio recordings of her own voice laughing about how easy it was to nudge things into place once Grandma got too weak to follow the numbers. Her expression changed from indignation to confusion to pure, desperate calculation. She realized they weren't bluffing. She asked for water. Then she asked for me. The officer called me back into the room. My mother was sitting on the edge of the couch, spine ramrod straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lipstick had faded, her blouse slightly wrinkled, her posture still immaculate, until you looked at her eyes. They were glassy and wild. She waited until the officer stepped out to speak. "You did this to us," she whispered, barely audible. The venom was gone. Replaced by something worse. Wounded pride. "This family, we gave you everything." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "You gave me lies. And now I'm giving them back to you. Neatly packaged. Legally bound." She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Not a scream. Not a denial. Just breath. Tight and shallow. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one writing the story. I didn't blink when the cuffs came out. Two officers stood behind my mother, one reading her rights with the detached rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, stone still, as the metal clicked around her wrists. She looked like she was holding her breath, as if maybe the moment would dissolve if she stayed quiet long enough. But it didn't. And for once, silence didn't protect her, it documented her. They moved to my father next. He put up more of a show. He called it a misunderstanding, raised his voice, demanded names, threatened lawsuits. But the officer didn't flinch. The paperwork was already filed. The warrants signed. Every lie had been untangled. Every falsified number, every forged signature, every betrayal repackaged into undeniable evidence. I watched him try to hold on to the illusion of control, even as his hands were pulled behind his back. His mouth was still moving as they walked him out the door, shouting words he didn't believe, to an audience that no longer listened. The extended family scattered like frightened birds. Aunt Maria collapsed into a chair, hand over her mouth. My cousin stepped outside, phone trembling in his grip, trying to call someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe just a friend who'd still pick up. Leah cried quietly in the corner. And Jordan? He just stared at me with wide, haunted eyes like I'd become a stranger. Maybe I had. Or maybe they'd never really seen me at all. I walked to the door, the late afternoon light stretching long across the floor like the shadow of a life ending. I stepped past my mother, still seated, still waiting to be led away. Her head turned toward me, eyes glassy, lips trembling like she wanted to say something final. But I didn't give her the space. I crouched slightly, leaned close enough that only she could hear me, and whispered the line I had rehearsed since the first time she made me feel small. You should have loved me while you had the chance. Her mouth twitched. Whether it was pain or rage or regret, I couldn't tell. I didn't care. I straightened up and walked away. I should have felt triumph, but what I felt was cleaner than that, calm, solid, grounded. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to end something. To finally close a door that had been left open too long, leaking rot into every corner of my life. Outside, the officers loaded them into separate cruisers. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, pretending not to watch, their faces full of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. But I didn't look away. I wanted to witness the ending. Not for vengeance. For truth. I was turning back toward the house when I heard his voice. My father. Still cuffed, half-seated in the squad car, leaning just enough to catch my attention. There's still time to stop this, he called out, his voice sharp and low, meant only for me. I paused. His eyes locked on mine, and he smiled, not the empty, paternal smile he used for public image, but the one I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. The dangerous one. The calculating one. You go through with this, he said, and I'll make sure they find out what you did. You think I didn't keep records too? The breath caught in my chest, but only for a moment. Because even in chains, he was still trying to control the narrative. Still trying to scare me into silence. Still playing a game he no longer owned. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the game was almost over. And I had the last move. I didn't sleep the night after the arrests. Not from fear, those days were over, but from clarity. A rare, searing kind of alertness that comes when every mask has fallen and you're finally standing in the wreckage with no one left to lie to you. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't tense. It wasn't loaded. It was clean. Quiet like ash after a fire. I made coffee at dawn, no sugar, no cream. Just bitter truth and steady hands. His words had followed me home like a shadow. You go through with this, and I'll make sure they find out what you did. The implication was clear, he believed he still had something. That even in shackles, he could maneuver, manipulate, make me question the ground beneath my feet. But the thing about men like my father is this, they always think the final blow belongs to them. They can't imagine a world where their daughter might not only survive their threats, but use them. He thought he'd kept records. Of course he had. Insurance policies masquerading as leverage. Maybe he had old emails, edited messages, out-of-context clips. Maybe he had conversations he'd baited me into when I was still naive enough to believe his concern was real. I let him believe I was afraid of it. That was the gift. I drove straight to my attorney's office that morning with a flash drive of my own, labeled King's Gambit. Inside it was every conversation I'd recorded since the moment I began my quiet war. Every document I had that predated his supposed evidence. Even surveillance from our home's security system that captured the moment he tried to coerce me into signing away my inheritance. We reviewed everything again. Carefully. Methodically. There's nothing he has that overrides this, she said after an hour, leaning back in her chair, eyes sharp with the kind of satisfaction only justice provides. But just in case, I'll have a restraining order filed for attempted blackmail. That's leverage you now own. It wasn't just about dismantling his attempt, it was about making sure he understood what it felt like to be outplayed. To think you're holding a weapon and realize it's been disarmed, turned, and aimed right back at you. I left the office with a copy of the new filing and sent a notarized copy to the correctional facility where he was being held. The return address was clean. Professional. But the note inside was handwritten. I warned you not to bet against me. Echo. Let him sit with that. I spent the rest of the day closing loops, freezing accounts, retitling assets, finalizing statements for the court case that was no longer a question of if but how long. The financial restitution process had already begun. My name was being restored. My credit repaired. And my identity, my real identity, was finally, legally, mine again. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about unlearning the lies they had engraved into my skin. I changed the locks on the house. Took down the family portraits in the hallway, the ones where I was always positioned just slightly off-center. I burned the old birthday cards with their empty platitudes and passive-aggressive love. I repainted my bedroom. Not to forget. To reclaim. I didn't cry. Not even once. Because this was never a grief story. It was a resurrection. 3 days after I dismantled his blackmail, a letter arrived in the mail, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Neat. Controlled. Still trying to prove something. It was postmarked from the prison. My father's last word. I held it in my hand, unshaken. Because whatever it said inside, it no longer held power. But I opened it anyway. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I held it for a long time before opening it, letting it rest on my palm like something that might still bite. The handwriting on the front was sharp, measured, like always. Controlled to the last curve of each letter, because he never did anything without calculation. I expected venom. A final attempt at dominance. A threat with a polite veneer, as he was so fond of delivering. But when I finally broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside, what I found wasn't hatred. It was something far more telling. It was fear. The letter was short. No grand justifications. No carefully built narrative. It opened with my name, my full name, underlined, and then a pause. Like even on paper, he struggled with how to address me when power no longer flowed in his direction. You were never supposed to get this far, he wrote. You were supposed to bend. To need us. To fail. The honesty of it stunned me more than any insult could have. He wasn't masking it anymore, not the plan, not the manipulation, not the decades of scaffolding they had built around my silence. It had been intentional. All of it. Grooming me to be dependent. To question myself. To collapse under the weight of their disappointment. We thought if we broke you early, you'd never have the strength to rise. We didn't expect this. There was no apology. Of course not. People like him don't apologize. But there was something else, something involuntary. A confession. You terrify me now. The way you walked through our lies like fire. The way you didn't flinch when it all crumbled. You were always smarter than we gave you credit for. That was our first mistake. I traced the sentence with my thumb, half expecting the words to disappear. But they remained, etched in ink and weakness. He had spent a lifetime controlling the narrative. And now, in his final act, he was surrendering it to me. You've won. And I don't know who you'll be without us in your way. That scares me more than anything. That was the last line. No signature. I folded the letter once, twice, and placed it gently on the table. Then I picked up the matchbox. I walked to the backyard, quiet now, no family barbecues, no staged laughter, no backyard lies. Just the wind and the sound of things finally letting go. I opened the rusted fire pit lid and dropped the letter inside. Then, without ceremony, I struck the match. The paper caught quickly. I watched the flames eat the words, curling the edges black, turning confession to ash. I didn't need a grave for my past. I needed a furnace. Inside the house, the walls were bare now. The final relic sat on the mantel, a framed family photo from my high school graduation. The one where my mother's hand was on my shoulder like a claw dressed in pearls, and my father stood just a little behind, as though already calculating what could be taken from me. I took it down. Carried it outside. Laid it gently into the fire. The glass cracked before the image burned. I watched it until there was nothing left. Then I stood alone in the smoke and silence, cleaner than I'd ever felt, and said aloud, just for myself. I was born into their story. But I rewrote the ending. And for the first time I believed it. In the final pages, I don't walk away, weeping or wrecked, I rise. Not as their daughter, but as the woman they failed to control. The woman they tried to erase. My revenge wasn't just in the arrests or the courtroom victories, it was in reclaiming every stolen truth, every silenced scream, every fragmented piece of myself they used as currency. Their empire of lies collapsed not with a bang, but under the steady weight of undeniable evidence. Their final weapon, my silence, became my sharpest blade. I took back the inheritance, yes, the money, the property, the name. But more than that, I took back the narrative. I stepped out of their shadow and into my own legacy, unchained, unashamed, and finally, whole. There are scars, of course. There always are. But they remind me of what I endured. What I outsmarted. What I survived. This isn't just my story. It's a map for every daughter told she was too much, every child blamed for the wounds they didn't cause. Before this ends, tell me the part that hit you hardest. Some daughters inherit trauma. I chose to inherit power,